Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been following for you today. Mexican cartels have been trafficking in record numbers of human beings and drugs through the southern border. What happens to those people who are indebted to the cartels? Texas Congressman Chip Roy has some answers. House Republicans in the Foreign Affairs Committee urged Secretary Blinken to issue an urgent warning to the athletes heading to China for the Winter Olympics. With Democrats and Republicans struggling to find common ground at the Capitol, the issue of China and their human rights abuses has become an issue that both parties can stand behind. Florida Congressman Mike Waltz is here with us to discuss. A movie depicting China's human rights abuses is on the big screen in theaters throughout the country. The former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, says it was a moving, honest, and scathing indictment of the CCP. A bridge in the city of Bridges suddenly collapsed today. The accident struck just hours before President Biden visited Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's Fern Hollow Bridge collapsed at around 7 a.m. this morning. It left 4 people hospitalized, 10 injured, and caused a large gas leak. The accident gave President Biden, who was on his way to Pittsburgh, an opportunity to emphasize the importance of infrastructure spending.
I'm speechless standing here, it completely collapsed and fell about 60 feet down into Frick Park here.
The situation was quickly under control by noon when President Biden visited the site.
And we're gonna fix them all. Not a joke. This is going to be a gigantic change, and there's 43,000 nationwide, and we're sending the money.
Biden was scheduled today to speak about the bipartisan infrastructure deal, which was passed last year. Biden says the country also needs to spend more in research and development while other countries are catching up.
The United States of America used to be ranked #1 in the world in investing in the future. Now we rank #9 in research and development. China was #8 3 decades ago. Today it's #2.
2 top Democrat candidates of Pennsylvania did not attend the president's speech, citing a scheduling conflict. And the White House has not yet offered an explanation for that leaked video of illegal immigrants being flown into New York back in August, an operation that was supposed to be kept quiet. Let's take a look.
This 51-minute video released this week was obtained through a Freedom of Information request and published by the New York Post. Former county executive and now Republican candidate for governor, Rob Astorino, made the request. It's body cam footage from a Westchester County police officer. In the background, a plane that flew in from El Paso, Texas, hours earlier, dropping off a flight of what appeared to be illegal immigrants in New York State. And the policemen at the airport have questions.
Secure facility here, and we don't really know anything, and we're in charge of security. And what happens when they go on their bus? They're meeting with specific people? Okay.
And the message from a self-proclaimed government contractor involved in the operation.
But DHS wants everything on the download. Technically, we're not supposed to show IDs or anything like that. Like I said, everything's supposed to be hush-hush.
NTD has reached out to the White House for comment on this, but we haven't heard back yet. This leaked video comes as Border Czar Vice President Harris this week vowed to tighten up relations with Honduras, a country that is one of the largest sources of migrants coming to the U.S.
And if they leave, it is usually because they are either fleeing harm or they simply cannot satisfy their basic needs or their family's needs if they stay.
Harris's plan for quelling the border crisis is to deal with what she calls the root causes of migration. So she's calling for increased investment in Central America. The U.S. has already sent hundreds of millions of dollars to the Northern Triangle for humanitarian assistance. And Harris started a call to action fund to collect money from private companies to further invest in the area. The total is now over $1.2 billion. Now Harris is betting on the new president, a Democratic socialist, to root out corruption and make good use of the U.S. dollars sent to make the country better.
We are committed with our democratic socialism proposal to lay the foundations of a head-on battle against corruption so that these facts that have shamed us will never again be repeated.
The area of cooperation and work that we will do together on economic prosperity will be pivotal to that issue, in particular of irregular migration.
And lawmakers on Capitol Hill support this approach of tightening relations with Honduras. Just this week, House Democrats on the Foreign Affairs Committee sent a letter to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, urging him to strengthen U.S.-Honduras relations and to bring a sense of hope among the Honduran population. So through investing more in these Central American countries and trying to help their governments root out corruption, through doing this, the Biden administration hopes it will help the migration issue. But many are skeptical of this, and how will it play out? Well, only time will tell. Steve, back to you.
NTD's sister media, the Epoch Times, has just recently reported that authorities have seized a record amount of the deadly drug called fentanyl at the southern border in Texas. We're happy to have Congressman Chip Roy here with us to discuss. Congressman Chip Roy, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Happy to join you. Thanks for having me on.
Now, Congressman, on the issue of the southern border, sometimes our thoughts just seem to default to the illegal human crossings and the humanitarian crisis. But a major part of this crisis down there is the drug trafficking and the Mexican cartels. Can you tell us a bit about how the cartels are operating right now?
Well, yeah, as you know, I represent a district in Central Texas. The western edge of the district I represent is about 100 miles from the border. So it directly impacts the people that I represent. And, you know, we had a great meeting in September with Senator Cruz, my former boss and my good friend, and a number of folks involved with understanding exactly what's happening with the drug trade and the impact on our people, the impact on our schools, the impact on our families, the extent to which fentanyl, 14,000 pounds was intercepted last year, but thousands of pounds got through. We had 100,000 Americans die from opioid poisoning. They're not really overdoses. They're poisoning because people take Xanax. A lot of our kids in college and high school or young adults take Xanax, or they might smoke pot that is laced with fentanyl. And next thing you know, they end up dead. We've had some high-profile deaths in Austin, but we've had a lot of non-high-profile deaths in schools and in families all across the country. When we were all wound up about cocaine in the 80s, we were talking about 10,000. Last year it was 100,000. This is getting worse. It's synthetic. China is moving it through Mexico. Cartels are making money. China is getting empowered, and America is getting hammered, all because this administration refuses to do its job and secure the border. And we're all a lot more in danger than we would be if we had an administration that actually believed in enforcing the law.
Now, with the thousands of illegal immigrants now in the United States, you just sort of touched upon it. They're indebted essentially to these cartels. What should we know about this, and how do you suppose they'll pay off their debts?
Well, it's a pretty horrific reality of what we deal with human trafficking and the sex trafficking trade and labor trafficking trade right here in Central Texas, right up I-35, which is just a few miles behind me here, right up 281 coming up north out of San Antonio, throughout the entire corridors, I-10, moving west and east, heading over to Houston or heading out to El Paso and out to the West Coast. These are human beings. They are put into labor or sex trafficking trade, and they're basically held as slaves and to enrich the worst elements of our society, cartels, but also just illegal, illicit organizations that are perfectly happy to use the cartel network to get the people that they're going to abuse. It's absolutely horrific, but we're allowing it to happen on our watch, and it's done in the name of compassion. It's done in the name of open borders somehow being good for migrants. It's a lie. It's a lie. Talk to the people in South Texas. Senator Cruz and I did when we went down to Laredo in September and met with all the leadership in West County who are furious at the Biden administration, angry at the president, the vice president, the secretary, for abandoning their job, ignoring them, while they're getting inundated and having to deal with all of this and having to see their communities get endangered and see the crime rates go up, see ranches get overrun, livestock getting out, and frankly, Mexico turning into a narco terror state that isn't safe to even go across and visit it.
Now, if I could just ask you, what's your prediction for the border in 2022?
Well, it's going to keep getting worse. We just had 500,000 apprehensions in the last 3 months of 2021. As I said, we had about 14,000 pounds of fentanyl that was apprehended. But that's not talking about the million people who were either released into the United States or got away. 1 million people. Think about that. If the entire metroplex of Austin, Texas was released into the United States or were got away. In 2022, expect more of the same, as long as the administration refuses to use the tools that Congress has given them and enforce the laws they are required to enforce to actually secure our border. I hear them talking about the sovereignty of Ukraine. Well, you know what? I agree. But our job as a sovereign nation is to defend our border. I'd like to help our allies in Ukraine with assets and whatever they can do to hold the line against Putin. But I don't know why this president is hell-bent on sending 8,500 of our young men and women to Ukraine when they won't do anything to secure our own border. I think the American people want to see change at the border. I know Texans do. They've had it up to here and are run out of patience with an administration that is endangering them and endangering our country in the false name of compassion.
It's a very serious issue down there. Congressman Chip Roy, thank you.
Thanks for having me on. God bless.
Texas Congressman Michael McCaul and Republican members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee are urging Secretary of State Blinken to warn athletes of the risks they face while they're in China. They sent a letter addressing several issues related to the Beijing Winter Olympics. It mentions that this is the first time that an Olympic Games will be held in a country that is conducting an ongoing genocide. This is in reference to the mass incarceration of the Uyghur ethnic minorities in Xinjiang province. According to the letter, the Uyghurs are subject to forced labor, forced abortion, and forced sterilization, in what both Congress and the administration have referred to as genocide. The letter also says, quote, U.S. athletes deserve to be fully informed of the full breadth of the CCP's atrocities and malign actions before competing. It also warns of the consequences for opposing the CCP's rights abuses. Washington, D.C. has never been so polarized, with partisan battles taking center stage on Capitol Hill. However, there is one very important issue that just might be able to unite both Republicans and Democrats, and that is the issue of the Chinese Communist Party. Here with us to discuss is Florida Congressman Mike Waltz. Congressman Mike Waltz, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Oh, sure. Good to be with you.
Now, Congressman, you just introduced a bill stripping the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, of its not-for-profit status. You pointed out that over 200 human rights organizations begged the IOC not to hold the Olympics in China. Now, do you think the IOC decision was a monetary one, and how might your bill help going forward?
Well, I think it's important to note that it was a bipartisan bill, with a Democrat co-sponsor, and to understand the 501c4, which is the tax-exempt status that the IOC enjoys, is an organization focused on intended for social welfare. And given the fact that nearly 1 million Muslims are in concentration camps, both the previous and current administration have cited evidence of mass torture, slave labor, mass rape campaigns, forced abortions, not to mention stamping out freedom in Hong Kong, covering up COVID, and a whole list of other atrocities. I think those human rights groups are absolutely right. Beijing is the last place we should be hosting an Olympics, and it certainly is not in line with the social welfare organization. And yes, I do think the amount of money is involved and is what is driving these decisions.
Now, Congressman, do you also think that hosting the Olympics in a way glorifies the CCP and minimizes these human rights abuses?
Oh, I think it absolutely does. I think every athlete that's participating, every country that's sending a delegation is turning a blind eye to these ongoing atrocities. And look, it's the IOC at the end of the day that awarded the games there and has refused repeated hundreds of requests to move the games or to delay them. And the IOC is the one that is putting our athletes in a position of ignoring their values, turning it back on their own morals and what they know is right and wrong, or being able to compete. And I think the last thing the United States taxpayer should be doing is subsidizing that behavior or the tax-exempt status.
Now, the State Department has just issued a statement condemning Beijing for sentencing 11 Falun Gong practitioners to prison sentences as long as 8 years for their religious beliefs. This is happening just weeks before the Olympics when all eyes are on Beijing. Falun Gong spokesperson Levi Browdy says the CCP is intentionally showing the world that it can persecute Falun Gong and no one will stop them. What do you make of it?
Well, it's the persecuting the Falun Gong. It's the forced organ harvesting that is just unconscionable and disgusting that the Chinese authorities are also going to the Falun Gong just based on a religious preference, literally bulldozing churches, the persecution of Christians, Tibetan Buddhists, Uyghur Muslims, the ongoing religious persecution and the most brutal type has been happening for decades there and is only worsening. Remember that Beijing just had an Olympics in 2008. Many human rights groups protested then, and the IOC and the Chinese Olympic Committee made all kinds of assurances, but we've only seen their behavior go from bad to worse, and the atrocities go from bad to worse. So when do we say is enough is enough? If an ongoing genocide isn't enough to have the IOC look elsewhere, I don't know what is.
Now, Congressman, you made a very important point, I think, previously when you mentioned that your bill is bipartisan. Communist China is a threat on multiple fronts, not just the treatment of its own people, but the surveillance of Olympic athletes, the threat it poses to Taiwan, the spies that we have right here in America. The list goes on and on. Right. At a time when our country is so polarized, it was extremely encouraging to see that you introduced your bill with your Democratic colleague, Jennifer Wexton. Do you think the threats posed by the communist Chinese will help bring more Democrats and Republicans together?
Well, I certainly hope so. It's kind of ebbing and flowing. Frankly, when President Trump was in office and he was pointing out the fact that this was likely a lab leak that unleashed this pandemic on the world, and we just saw kind of a retraction of really taking a strong stand on China's atrocities and aggressiveness around the world. But I think now we're seeing people come back online because at the end of the day, this isn't a Republican or Democrat issue. This is about our basic freedoms, morals, and values, and standing strong for those who should have those basic human rights. The thing the Chinese Communist Party fears the most is its own people. And you're absolutely seeing the tough hand of Xi and the CCP on display. If these athletes think they can go there and protest and speak out and use this as a platform. And just one other piece here, American companies are just as complicit. The Olympic sponsors, many of whom preach good corporate governance, ESG, social justice here at home, they want to boycott Georgia based on their moves towards voter integrity, or however you want to debate that. But they want to boycott Georgia, but then turn a total blind eye to these atrocities that are ongoing. And it's all about their balance sheet at the end of the day. We need to call them out on it.
Congressman Mike Waltz, thank you.
All right, thanks so much.
As we reported yesterday, the movie Unsilenced is showing at venues across the country. The movie depicts the ongoing persecution of Falun Gong practitioners in China. It has received quite a few positive reviews, including one from former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Pompeo today shared his feedback on social media after watching the movie. He described Unsilenced as a, quote, moving, honest, scathing indictment of the CCP. He condemns Communist Party leaders for inflicting what he calls utter depravity and power-driven horrors. Pompeo is encouraging more people to watch the movie, saying it unsilences the wonderful Chinese people. The movie is currently premiering in 30 cities across the U.S. Countries around the world have been dropping their COVID-19 vaccine and mask mandates. Could the United States be next? Former Senator Jim DeMint has some answers. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capitol Report. Thousands of people from all over the country made their way to Washington, D.C. last week to protest the vaccine mandates. More countries around the world have ended the mandates this week. We sat down with former Senator Jim DeMint to get his perspective on pandemic-related mandates and the inflation that has hit our country. Senator, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
Now, Senator, I want to ask you, you were a lawmaker for many years, so you know how the sausage is made when it comes to these vaccine and mask mandates. What is the actual difference between a law and a mandate, and why does it matter?
Well, it matters a lot. There are a lot of folks, including me, who don't think the federal government has the authority, or particularly not executive authority, to order states to do vaccine mandates or individuals to take a shot that they don't want, or to wear a mask where they don't want. So there's a lot of question about that. But if the Congress actually passes a law that requires something, and the president signs it, then it's in what we call statute, and it's something that carries a whole lot more weight. And the Supreme Court would have to strike that down as being unconstitutional, which I think is a legitimate question. But it goes to the bigger point of whether or not they're even justifiable at this point. And frankly, I don't think it makes sense. I don't think we have the evidence to suggest that we know enough to say that you have to take a vaccine, or that you have to wear a mask, or a business has to close down. There's just too many questions. I've got the vaccine. I wear a mask sometimes, but fortunately back in South Carolina, I don't have to wear it when I'm walking around outside. But the fact is, we don't know enough. And I think what we should do as a nation, doctors, politicians, media, is give people the best information we have. Let doctors express different opinions, and let people make informed decisions about it. Because if I take a vaccine and you don't, I'm not in more risk because you don't, despite what some doctors might say. It's your risk. And we need to allow that in a free country.
Now, Senator, I want to ask you, recently we've seen major countries around the world, Ireland, England, just seemingly evaporate this mandate overnight. Why do you think that is, and do you see that happening in our country?
It almost has to. I think countries, Israel, almost everyone was vaccinated there, and they have one of the highest rate of infection. Now, a lot of the variants now, particularly Omicron, is infecting more people, but very few are getting seriously sick unless they have other conditions that exacerbate it. So, and we're seeing that there's no correlation with lockdowns and less infections and all the mandates. Vaccines, actually, if you look at evidence worldwide, there is some that suggests that it might make you more vulnerable to get a disease, but then it would make the symptoms less serious. So I think there are fair questions of whether or not this should be forced on people. Certainly not a lockdown blowing our economy again. I've been walking around some of the streets here in D.C. today. All the businesses that were here for years, so many of them have closed. And that's just not fair to do that to someone who's been building a business for 10 or 20 years.
I want to get your thoughts on inflation and whether or not you think that this is long-lasting or fleeting.
I think it's going to be long-lasting, and even if it slows down and the inflation's not as much next year as it is, I don't think the prices are going to go back down. Energy could. In effect, we've seen a big fluctuation over the years depending on our own production. But under the current policies, we've stifled production. We've created penalties, direct and indirect. There are a lot of people who do business in the fossil fuel industry, or banks don't do business with them anymore. If we continue with that, I think you're going to see inflation for a long time, because a lot of people don't seem to understand that everything we buy is affected by the cost of energy. It has to come in a truck or a train. A lot of the fabrics of clothes we wear are made with petroleum products, plastics, and in addition to the gasoline in our cars. So and not only that, and the energy thing, that's the one thing that we could do, that we saw a direct impact of change in policy when Biden came in. We went from being an energy exporter to an importer. We're now dependent even on Russia for gas and oil. I think this is completely unacceptable. But the Federal Reserve has printed so much money, created it digitally anyway, bought so much of our own debt. We've had these big COVID packages where we're still sending out tax credit, unsolicited. I've got people in my family who just started getting checks for their children. So we've just made the country flush with money. An economist will say when there's too much money chasing too few goods, you're going to get inflation. And it just looks to me that given the current policies, which will likely continue in some way for at least 3 years, we're going to have inflation for a long time.
Former Senator Jim DeMint, thank you.
Thank you.
Consumer spending in the U.S. dropped in December, and all gains have been lost that were made during early holiday spending in November. The Commerce Department released its fourth quarter report on Thursday, which details GDP and consumer spending data over the last 3 months of 2021. GDP, which represents the growth of the economy, increased at an annual rate of 6.9%. Consumer spending closed off 2021 with a 0.6% slump in December. It had been plagued by Omicron, supply chain shortages, and a rise in inflation. A powerful winter storm will slam the East Coast, mostly impacting the Northeast from Maryland to Maine. According to the National Weather Service, the winter storm will bring high winds and potentially more than a foot of snow across the Northeast. Washington, D.C. started to feel the impacts this afternoon, and it may bring 1 to 4 inches of snow by Saturday morning. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin has declared a state of emergency in his state. So far, airlines have canceled more than 1,200 flights on Saturday alone. That's all we have for you tonight on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.